Hey, Bess.
Hey, Liz.
Thank you for coming back together. We're starting a test of a
Yes.
podcast
Yes.
about communicators and behind the scenes. And you're my co host, but also today I want to interview you, if that's okay.
I think so. I
Because
think
I
so.
feel like to start, we probably both need to interview each other so people know who we are as
Yep.
we're interviewing others. Um, and part of the premise is that people in comms are behind the scenes and we aren't usually very comfortable being the subject, but that there's a lot to learn when you peel it back and look behind the scenes. So thank you for letting
Yes.
me interview you today.
Yes, thank you. Thanks for preparing some questions, too. I'm
I did.
excited to
I
see what
did.
you came up with.
Well, to start, I want to go back. What led you to journalism
That
as a
is
career?
a great question. So, my father was always a big newspaper reader. He was always into the news, like eating dinner at night. We were always watching the news as a family, listening to it. So, I just became very interested in news at a young age. And when it came time to kind of pursue a career, I didn't know if I wanted to go the PR route or the news route. And just kind of the news route fell into my lap. And so, I went that direction for several years, and it's been very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, you stayed in journalism for quite a while. Maybe
Yeah.
talk about that quickly and the role that you had, and what was it that you loved about it?
Yeah, so when I started out in TV news, I started out reporting, and I actually did not like reporting because there are producers who kind of control everything you do and they take away a lot of your creativity. At least that's what I experienced. And so I decided I wanted to go the producing route because you could use your creativity a little bit more. And so, yeah, I started out producing when I was about 20 and did that in Duluth for almost a year before I was at a station that had a bunch of layoffs as they did a station consolidation, and ended up in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I was in Albuquerque for 7 years and got to do some really cool stuff. I mean, I got to, you know, help write for the morning show, then moved up to actually producing my own newscast. And I was producing all the Albuquerque International Balloon Fiesta coverage for NBC at one point. So I did that for 6 of the 7 years I was there. I got to help start up a newscast, which is really exciting. We started up a 6:30 p.m. newscast and got to be part of that whole creative process. You know, just trying to figure out what the content is, what the flow is, all that, and then worked my way into management. And from there, I ended up moving back to Minnesota at WCCO and was the morning show executive producer there. And so that was a ton of fun. Got to work with a great crew, even though you're working the worst hours in the world. I had to wake up at midnight, get into work by 1:30 a.m. But it was super fun to be part of the entire process of like deciding what stories you're going to cover for the day, what the reporter should cover, um, you know, the direction everything was going in the newscast. I mean, I don't think a lot of people realize how much goes on behind the scenes for a newscast. So it was super fun to be part of that. And then I ended up leaving news for a year and was kind of on the other side. So I was on TV for about a year and missed news. And so I ended up back in news producing again. And so it's just, I think part of the thing you'll find with a lot of people who work in news is they have a lot of passion and they like being part of the process. They like being in the know, I think, is another big thing. You like knowing what's going on. I think that's been the hardest thing I've experienced since I left news again, is just you don't know what's going on. You don't know all the details. And so that was really exciting about being in news.
Talk a little bit more about what you were saying, that when you are producing the show, you're, in a lot of ways, you're always getting lots of information, obviously, from whether it's about breaking news that's happening, from PR professionals like us, or anybody who's trying to help feed the stories that you tell. How does that process work of deciding what stories become part of the newscast and deciding what you want to tell?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it varies quite a bit. I can start out by kind of just talking about like what a normal day is for a producer. So you start out your day with a big editorial meeting with managers, with the reporters, with anchors, and you just talk about what we know is going on that's in the day file, or what sources have told our reporters is going on. So you kind of weigh all that information and decide like what actually impacts people the most. What are people going to care about the most? And that's kind of how you really decide like the direction the coverage is going to go for the day. And I mean, you know, newsrooms are getting a ton of information from PR agencies, from just, you know, sources, from everyone. So I think a lot of it really comes down to what is impacting people the most at this moment. And sometimes stuff that comes from agencies like ours, they're important stories, they're interesting, but it might not be the biggest thing that's impacting somebody that day, which is why, you know, I think it's a little tricky for people in our profession to understand, like, just because this story isn't being covered today, the day we send it out, or the, you know, a couple days after, doesn't mean that's not important, then it won't get covered. It's just, there's other things that take precedent to it, and a lot of decisions are being made behind the scenes, and yeah.
Yeah, not to fast forward, but that is always a challenging conversation with clients about, it could be a great story, but it's hitting at the wrong moment. And so how do we navigate that? And I know you spend a lot of time thinking about those things now, but on the other side of the table, as you're getting all of those things in, what made stories stand out to you that were being pitched to you as opposed to breaking news, you know, something's happening, a source is sharing that information and it rises to the top?
Yeah, I think pitches that stood out, it depended on how like people wrote the pitch, how they addressed you. It depended, you know, did they give you too much information or not enough information? I mean, there's a tricky balance between all of that. Long pitches, producers and reporters and assignment desk editors don't have time to like sift through it to try to figure out what it's all about. So I think that's why it's really important on our end to just get to the point, get to the bottom of what we're trying to pitch and why people should care.
Those are really good tips. Asterisk that part to go back to.
Yeah.
Think about it. So what led you to leave journalism? Because I know there's a lot of passion and heart in the work that you did. What led you to leave it, including 1 a.m. arrivals?
I think it has to do a lot with the changing news landscape. I mean, I look back at when I started out producing, and I would be able to go in, figure out what stories were going to be in my newscast, figure out what order they were going to be in, and I had somebody to help me find video. I had somebody to edit video. I had somebody to help make graphics. I had somebody to help me think about all these different aspects, creative aspects of what a newscast looks like. And it's not that anymore. You're doing everything as a producer, and it tends to be a lot. And I mean, I think aside from like the workload on a daily basis, a lot of it too is, I mean, like, look at what's been going on in our world. I mean, there's been a lot of really heavy stuff, and there's been a lot of people leaving news because of that. I mean, I feel like people in news generally are very strong people and can kind of push some of that aside. But like, you get to the point after, I mean, COVID was really hard to cover. I mean, you had the murder of George Floyd and all the uprising around the world that was, you know, a product of that. It became really, really hard emotionally and mentally.
I think all of us feel that, and to be on the front line of that, I think that gets, I don't, well, maybe it's more of a question. Do you think that people forget that people who work in news, not just the reporters, the producers, the camera people, everybody who's running news programs are people too, and how all of that affects how the world today is affecting them. Because if we feel like it's heavy, when you're on those front lines and reporting about it, you carry that. How is that being a human, but also trying to be an objective party reporting on it?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I've seen a lot of people who are newer in the industry, just they can't handle it. I mean, I see a lot of people who are in it as long as I have been or had been. Like, I think we can handle it more because we've had all these other experiences that have kind of helped us deal with a lot of heavy things that maybe haven't been quite as heavy as what things have been in the last few years. And so we at least kind of have had that experience of dealing with things emotionally and mentally. But I mean, it's hard. I mean, I think people forget about how much information is coming in and how much information that newsrooms actually are able to tell the public. I mean, there's only so much time, and then there are the details that people don't need to know. The general public doesn't need to know, and it's not that anyone's hiding it from them. It's just there are certain things that, as a news outlet, you kind of make that decision of what do people actually need to know. And I think, it's kind of the same for police officers and first responders. I think people forget that, like, they really are real people, and they're dealing with that firsthand. And so, I mean, not to compare being a journalist to their jobs, but there are some similarities in it that I think people don't really realize.
Talk about what you were just saying with those decisions about what the public should know and what the public shouldn't, because that seems to be in conflict in news organizations today. It's no surprise that clicks right now are driving a lot of decision making in some organizations, and others adhere to the same editorial and journalistic standards that they have in the past. And we've got this just rise toward entertainment, like kind of a desensitization, in some ways, self-preservation, I think,
Yeah.
to some of the news that we read. But when you've got these entertainment-led, seeking clicks media that might be willing to report on things that end up becoming harmful to people because you're giving away a little bit too much, how do you see that conflict in media of news organizations trying to be successful, but also trying to adhere to journalistic standards, and also trying to play that arbiter of what's on and what does the public need to know about this, and what stuff is private?
Yeah, no, that's
in the landscape.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I think it varies depending on the situation. I mean, you could have a situation with, like, a domestic abuse case, and it's like, you're obviously not going to give away any details that would give away anything about the victim or whatever. Or same with, like, murders. I mean, I remember getting some of the worst criminal complaints when I worked in Albuquerque, and it's like, you really had to sit there and just be like, what do we say? What don't we say? Anytime there's a case involving children or animals, people don't want to hear about it. They don't want to hear the story in the first place, and they don't want to hear details. And so it's really up to us to just be, very respectful of people in those situations. When it comes to, an arrest after any situation, I think most news organizations won't report the name of the person arrested until they're actually charged. Just out of respect for the fact somebody could be wrongfully charged. I mean, when I was first back to Minnesota, working in news, there was actually a case where police came out and said that this person was behind something, and it turned out they were not, and that person ended up taking their own life, and there were lawsuits across the board for everyone that reported what police reported without actual charges being filed against this person. And so I think for the most part, like, news organizations are very careful. I mean, like the entertainment industry news, that's a whole different ballgame. I mean, they're definitely going for clicks. They're going for what people want to hear. And I think it's a little bit more lenient because people are celebrities. People are in the public light. Like, it's different than your general local news.
Yeah. But given how much conflict there is about news and how it's reported and things today, what do you think of that difference of being a local news station that is trying to align with those journalistic standards and thinking about those things versus there might be a local blogger or somebody who isn't following those same norms? And how do you think how should we as a public be thinking about that?
Yeah,
today?
I think the two different sources are held to different things ethically, and I think it's on, us to, not me as a news person, but us as a general public to understand the sources that we're getting our news from and getting our information from. I mean, there's a number of bloggers out there now, and you can't take them as seriously as you would a general news outlet. So it's us being aware of where we are getting our news.
Yeah. What other misconceptions do you think are out there about news today?
Oh my gosh, there's so many.
What are a couple that you think are worth trying to clear up, especially to an audience that is a communications professional?
I think one of the biggest things that I ran into when I still was in news is, depending on what news outlet I worked for, people automatically assumed that that was my political association or my beliefs or anything like that. And so I think that always drove me crazy. I mean, I've been in conversations where I've started crying before because people are like, no, you work for them, like, this is your belief. I'm like, no, actually, I'm 22 years old and, like, have no idea what you're talking about, and I'm just here to report what we're reporting. So I would say that's a huge misconception about news, and I think it tends to come from the fact that, somebody might be political this way or political that way, and so they hear things how they want to hear them versus, like, I feel like every news outlet I've worked for has been so careful about being balanced. I mean, a lot of these stories go through several people before they even make air, and so there's so much caution used on that. And trying to think of another big
I think that's a really important thing, though, to underline. There are lots of checks and balances in any, would you say most, especially I'm thinking where you came from. So
Yes.
local broadcast news that's affiliated with one of the large networks is going to have not only journalistic standards that follow what any of us learned when we went to schools of journalism, if that's the way we went to school, and are going to have multiple people looking at a story to make sure that it's balanced, that it's accurate, that did we have the right sources, did we check our sources, even while you're dealing with things that are rapidly happening and trying to produce a show. Accurate, yes.
Yes.
And I think we're coming to a place where we need people to check themselves too about where did
Yes.
I get this information, and so I
Absolutely.
think that's important to reiterate as much as we can.
Yeah.
that Local news has high standards.
Yes, and I think what people don't realize is you might have an owner of a company or owner of a news station that, sure, they might be associated with whatever political party or whatever, but they have to realize, like, the newsroom has nothing to do, for the most part, with the owners. The owners don't come in on a daily basis and, like, critique what's happening in the newsroom or have any say in how news is being covered or anything like that. And so I think, I guess I can't blame people for thinking that. I mean, but I also have seen the inner workings of everything and know that, like, whoever owns it is not involved in what's happening on a daily basis. They're not in editorial meetings. They're not reading through scripts. They're not, having any say in how we're covering things.
It's an interesting time in news.
Yeah.
If you, now that you are on the outside of it, but have had a long career working in news, are there any things that you would say to, or that you would say it would, if you're looking at yourself, these are some things that are worth looking at, whether we're on the right path in terms of choices being made in newsrooms today, or just the business of operating, because there are the people who are reporting, and then there is the business behind it, and that's under a lot of pressure. Are there things that you think, hey, look at these things, we should think about if these are the right paths?
That's an interesting question.
Or things you'd just say, I think I would change this.
Like, as far as what they're covering on a
Maybe
daily
mostly
basis,
just
or
it's such an intersection of, it's so important. I was listening to the Daily podcast.
Yeah.
I guess this is giving away a day. We're taping this at the beginning of December. And they were reporting about how many people get their news straight from TikTok and Reels and YouTube. And it's a little bit scary to think about a person on TikTok being the arbiter of your news, depending on the source and where it's coming from. And part of what they were talking about was the economy and how perceptions about the economy are in some ways tied to where you're getting information from. So I've been just thinking about this in the last 24 hours about how we individually have a role to play in where we're getting our information, but also
Yes.
news organizations continuing to bring in younger people or whomever it is, somebody who no longer
Yeah.
trusts typical news. So
Yeah.
we have no power in this, but it's kind of fun to say, if you could do something different, what do you think would be important to think about?
I think you just touched on it. It's news outlets getting in front of their audiences. You're not trying to get audiences to come to you anymore, I think is a huge difference. You need to get in front of them. And I listened to a podcast about the Wall Street Journal that explains why they've been one of the most successful news outlets. I think I might have shared that with you. But it's because they've figured out ways to continually get in front of their audiences before their audiences realize they need them. And so it's fascinating. I mean, you look at TikTok, and I'm a huge TikTok fan. I might fall asleep to it every night. But I don't know if you were paying attention to when Burning Man was going on, and like there was the mud. The issue was the
Yes.
mud, but like there were all these conspiracy theories on TikTok about like an Ebola outbreak and all these other like outbreaks, and so many people were believing it. I mean, at one point I'm like Googling, like, is this what's going on at Burning Man? But I mean, there is that power in social media now. And so it comes down to us being smart consumers of news and knowing where we're getting our news from and not believing everything we see out there.
Absolutely. That's actually a really good example because it was happening and you couldn't
Oh,
get
yeah.
in, so you were relying on the reporting on the ground. I have a friend that I studied abroad with who was there, and she posted a video and it went super viral, and she had no idea. And it was used by national news organizations, most not giving her credit, like a lot of things that she afterward, in trying to pull that back, realized how far her
Oh, yeah.
stuff had spread. So it went to True News, but it was also reused in a lot of ways on TikTok. And it was fascinating to watch, kind of like wildfire, how it spread, but it also then spread not accurately in a lot of ways for her, that later she tried to clarify, but you can't really pull back at that point. So
Yeah.
that was a really interesting experience to see how social and especially short form video was impacting how it was covered.
Right. And to that point, too, I think what's also scary is you have these younger people who believe everything they see on TikTok. So you see like something like an Ebola outbreak at Burning Man. The younger folks are more likely to believe that versus like your traditional news outlets. And they think the news outlets are lying. And so it's just,
Yeah,
it's a tricky thing.
it is. I have a young daughter who does watch short form videos and will ask me if something is true at times, and I often think, no, that's not true. And a lot of them are insignificant. They're like related to the Titanic or something
Yeah.
that's not breaking news. But it's interesting, the information that can catch a fire.
Yeah.
And I think it is at the heart of one of the challenges in our industry, both on the journalism side, when we're trying to get stories told to the audiences that we're trying to tell stories to and reach them, and not just entertain them but inform as
Yeah.
well. And it's I don't think that anybody's got the right crystal ball yet for how to solve that.
Absolutely not.
But a lot of smart people are thinking about it, including here. So
Yeah.
I appreciate that it's a challenge of how to continue to evolve in something that has a lot of checks and balances, that it's highly produced, like a news program,
Yeah.
versus a lot of short form videos, also highly produced, but
Yeah.
it's a different output and a different use.
Yeah.
So, what do you think being on the other side, being as a PR professional and leading efforts pitching? How big of a change was that for you, and what do you think about it?
It's been interesting being on the other side, and I think my biggest takeaway is how when I was in news, if I wasn't interested in a story that a PR professional was pitching to me, I just ignored it for the most part because we were getting so many. And I just happened to work for shows where you were generally going to get more just because you had more guests, you had more like lifestyle segments, more human interest segments. So I am like the worst producer ever. And I mean, not all producers are, not all producers, but a lot of producers are like it, where you just ignore a lot of
I
the
also
emails that
get
come in.
Hundreds of emails a day,
Yeah.
sales solicitations that I'm not interested in, and I used to respond to them, and I don't anymore because
Yeah.
it's too overwhelming, and I would spend too much of my time.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I appreciate when something's unsolicited and uninteresting. It's not always your job to respond. So
Right.
I'll free you of that.
Right.
But
Well,
anyway.
thank you. Thank you. The thing I found about the emails that you're talking about now that we get as PR professionals, a lot of them, like, you can tell they're kind of spam because you can unsubscribe to them. Whereas,
That is fair.
yes, yes. So a lot of the emails, though, that came from PR agencies, like, if you weren't interested, you didn't respond. And, you know, usually they'd follow up. There's some PR professionals that followed up too much, and then you just get annoyed with them where you wouldn't take any of their pitches seriously because it's like, okay, you've asked me 5 times about this one and I've not responded a single time. Like, okay. But I wish, going back to my producing days, that I was a little bit more respectful of PR professionals because I realized that what the job is that we're trying to do on our end and what we're trying to do on behalf of our clients and how important that is. So I think that was kind of one of the most eye-opening things to me.
Yeah, that's funny, but also can see where you didn't have time to think about that at that
Right.
time.
And you don't think there's somebody on the other end waiting for you to respond and just let you know, yes, I'm interested, or no, I'm not. Like, it's that simple.
Yeah, okay, so that is a message to any journalists who listen to this. It's okay to say, I'm not interested. In fact, we do really appreciate it when you
Yes.
say, I'm not interested. Those emails are like, okay, I will move on.
Yeah, and you
Instead
don't even
of-
have to explain why. It's great if you explain why, but
Yeah.
you don't need to. Just letting us know so we don't waste any more of our time thinking about whether you're interested or not is just very respectful.
So a lot of the stuff that we're working on, minus crises, don't have a breaking news aspect to them, and are more thought leadership oriented. What do you find are some of the successful ways of positioning clients to get covered?
I think it's finding a way to tell the story that they are trying to tell that connects with the audiences we are trying to reach and bringing those points to light. I mean, you can pitch a story about anything, but if you're not telling the journalists why they should care or why their viewers should care, you're missing out. That's what journalists are looking for, is why their viewers care. What impact does it have on them? Or why is this super interesting? I mean, if it doesn't have a huge impact on them, why is this really interesting? Why is this something that we should be talking about? So just finding those nuggets of information and using those for your pitches.
Yeah, so PR professionals, that's our job. You have to go that far to make sure that you're making a case for why it is an important story and not just blast the same thing to everyone. Why would you care individually as a reporter too? What have you reported on that's similar? Things like that.
And I think it's up to us too to push our clients to find those stories. I mean, sometimes what they think is interesting is not necessarily what we find interesting, and so it's okay to tell them that and just tell them why. And like there's a way to find a story. There's a story in everyone and everything. It's just finding what that is.
Yeah, I think that's important to create that relationship
Yep.
too, where you can push back and say, that's great that you think that's awesome, and that might make a good press release, but it's probably not going to get the coverage that you have in mind.
Yep.
So if you were talking to a group of journalism students, people who think they want to go into journalism, what advice do you have to people who are coming into that career now?
Oh, gosh. I have so many things to say. So
Please
many things I
do.
don't
Yeah.
want to say, though,
Yeah.
too, because I would never discourage anyone from doing it. But I think anyone wanting to go into journalism, I think they have to realize how hard of a career it is. I mean, I think a lot of people see people on news and see people in newscasts and think it's so glamorous and everyone looks so great and the job must be easy because you just see people standing in front of a camera, but it's hard. It's hard. It's long hours. It's bad pay for many, many years until you work your way up. But like, you have to really be passionate about news and about people and telling people's stories in order to be successful. And I mean, I've seen a lot of people after a year or two just decide, this isn't for me, this is too much, this is too hard, I can't handle the emotional part of it. So I think just making sure people understand this isn't just a glamorous career where you're on TV and you're making a bunch of money and you're famous and everything. I don't know how many people I've talked to who are thinking about going into journalism, and I ask them, well, what do you want to do? And everyone's first answer is usually, I want to be an anchor. And it's like, do you know how hard you have to work to be an anchor? Like, you have a few people who get lucky and get great jobs, and sometimes it's based off connections, sometimes it is because they've proven themselves really early on and show they're a really hard worker. But for the most part, it's not like that. It's a lot of really hard hours. I mean, in my early career, I was working overnights. I was working 12-hour days. Even when I moved to, and that was working overnights. And so even when I moved to dayside positions, I was still working 12-hour days. Breaking news happens. Wildfires happened in New Mexico. Like, you just never knew what was going to come up and how long you'd end up working. I mean, even in Minnesota, there were so many significant things before the riots and George Floyd's murder and COVID and everything that, I mean, when I was working overnight, I'd go to bed usually at 4 p.m. and wake up at midnight. But between that 4 p.m. and midnight time span, I was waking up at 6, 8, 10, checking my phone. And I mean, if something happened, I was getting called in early on 2 hours of sleep. Like, you never know. And so you have to be really, really dedicated to wanting to be in news and really have that passion. And sometimes it takes people a while to figure out. You think you have it, and you decide this is too hard.
And that's okay too.
Yep, that's absolutely okay. Absolutely okay.
What skills do you need to have? Because it used to be that there was a reporter and they'd have a camera person and somebody else would
Yeah.
edit. I mean, I don't actually know. I haven't been in the newsroom. But today, do you have to be able to shoot and edit your own film? What are kind of like for the new reporter, what do they have to bring?
So I would say a new reporter starting out in the business, you are going to need to know how to shoot, how to edit, how to work really quickly under pressure. I mean, again, like what I was talking about when I first started out producing is I had all these other people to do all these other things for me. And when I left news, I was creating my own graphics. And luckily, I never got to the point where I had to edit my own video, but a lot of producers do now. But reporters, I mean, they're getting hired as multimedia journalists. So you're shooting, editing, you're doing all your own interviews. You're writing your own stuff. I know there are some reporters who even have to set up their own live shots and worry about their lighting, worry about, if their camera angle looks okay. And on top of that, they're writing scripts for the websites. And so, I mean, a reporter's day is extremely long, and some days you're in the 4, 5, 6 p.m. news, and then you're recording something for the 10 o'clock news. So it's hard. It's hard, and you really have to want to do it. It's fun. It's rewarding. I mean, I think that's actually one of the things that has been different being out in news is when I was producing, when I left the newsroom that day, I knew exactly what I had done. I knew, like, you had that satisfaction of, like, getting a newscast on the air, like, my job is done. Whereas going into PR, like, the job is just, I don't want to say it doesn't end, but, like, you don't have that instant gratification, satisfaction, whatever it is, that you accomplished this today. And so it's different. It's a different mindset.
The timelines are definitely longer and have different outcomes, and also different clients have different expectations, and so it's an always rolling needs that continue.
Yep.
Harder to check off the box and shut it all down. Sometimes.
That's a good way to put it. I like that. I'm going to steal that.
Yeah, I didn't work in journalism as you did, but I've always likened that to working in a restaurant, which was something that I liked doing.
Yeah.
But I loved that when you left, you never thought about that customer again or whatever, because
your shift was done.
You'd shipped it off, it was done, and obviously that is not a good comparison to producing news, way higher bar in a lot of ways that you were doing. But
similar
I understand
mentality.
When you're done, you can shut that piece down.
Yeah.
Except for those stories that probably really get in with you.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Okay, do you have one story that is a favorite of your experience in news that's worth kind of sharing as we wrap up this episode?
So, one of my favorites to tell, and it's a weird story, but we made a huge difference in the state of New Mexico. So when I was in Albuquerque, I oversaw investigations for a while. And there was one year where, it might have been over a couple of years span, where there were a few cases of people putting video cameras or recording devices in changing rooms and bathrooms in, like, stores,
So creepy.
whatever. Yeah, super, super creepy. But the problem is if they recorded somebody over the age of 18, they could not get charged for anything. Their video voyeurism laws in New Mexico did not cover anyone over the age of 18. So if you were an adult, it was perfectly fine for someone to go in and film you without you knowing. So I can't remember what year this would have been, if it would have been like 2010, 2011. An investigative reporter and I were working on a story, and our goal was to get this law changed and make state lawmakers realize what was going on and that this is not okay no matter how old you are. Like, this is wrong. So we went to the state capitol during the legislative session in Santa Fe, and my coworker put a fake camera in the men's bathroom. And so he brought a couple different lawmakers in and was like, hey, there's a camera in here. Like, what do you think of that? And the lawmakers were like, oh, why would there be a camera in here? He's like, it's legal. Like, it can be. Like, we're all over 18. That's fine. And then he brought, I can't remember if it was the third or fourth lawmaker in, and that one did not like it. And he actually called state police on us. And so we got taken into custody for a little bit while they tried to figure out if we broke a law. And it was a fake camera, again, so we were not breaking a law at all, but they didn't know it was a fake camera until state police went into the bathroom and took it down. But state police were just like, yeah, even if it was real, you guys didn't do anything wrong. They released us, and that year, a video voyeurism law got passed.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Because I don't know that I hear a lot of examples of how journalists take something like that, and like that's almost activism in a way toward an issue that keeps coming up, and that's really cool.
Yeah.
You guys took that on.
Yeah, we did a lot of work like that in New Mexico, which was really rewarding. I mean, now I feel like a lot of the investigative stuff you see is trying to, like, throw somebody under the bus versus, like, trying to take action to make a change. Yeah.
That's really neat, and good for you, because that is a really creepy law, and I'm glad it does not exist, so I can go to New Mexico and not be worried about that.
Yes, exactly, exactly. No, I think a lot of people were surprised. I mean, we were shocked to hear, like, there are no laws. Like, these people kept getting arrested and released because unless someone was under 18, they can't be charged, or people were getting arrested and only being charged for the people that were under 18 that were caught on camera. So it's pretty crazy.
But that is exactly how lawmaking sometimes has to work.
Yeah.
And so bravo
Yes.
on that.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing about your experience and
Yeah.
expertise. And I certainly am glad that you left news and are here because I
Yes.
love working with you and I've enjoyed this conversation. Thanks,
Yeah.
Bess.
Thank you, Liz.